look at why. Business in Sudan faces collapse as political turmoil takes a toll. And farmers in Madagascar go to great lengths to protect their vanilla crop. Well, let's start off the show in Zimbabwe. The country's economy is limping despite efforts by Finance Minister Mthuli to get it back to growth. Now, he seems to be doing everything, but results are slow to come so far. For the first time in years, however, we did see the government running a budget surplus and of course has stopped runaway money printing as well, which of course led to hyperinflation of about 500 billion% in 2008. Now, last month, the central bank raised its overnight lending rate to 50% in order to protect the local currency after ending a decade of dollarization. Mkhube, a former chief economist at the African Development Bank, has also agreed to a staff monitoring program with the International Monetary Fund. Now, Harare has promised not to borrow offshore and to cut reliance on the central bank in order to finance the country's deficits. And let's move on now. Business in Sudan has declined by an estimated 40% as the military and the country's pro-democracy movement continue to tussle for power. The cash-strapped nation has been in the midst of a political crisis since its long-serving ruler Omar al-Bashir was overthrown in April. Here's CGTN's Adina Matengo with the details.
Sudan's economy is currently in the middle of a massive financial crisis. The situation here at Hashim Abul Fadel's shopping center is no different. The unrest in the country has lashed Hashim's overall sales by 20 to 25% and as much as 40% for some other items.
Despite the pressure, despite the country going through a revolutionary situation, the economic situation is worse than before. And perhaps it is stable compared to before. However, if the situation continues, it will collapse.
I want to buy things, but there's no money. I have 7 children and I can't provide for all of them. But this is the general situation in Sudan. It's very bad, not only for me. We don't understand what is happening. We need to understand what is happening in this country.
Hashim is just one of the many struggling Sudanese who are facing an acute economic crisis. On Wednesday, Sudan's ruling generals and protesters inked a deal aimed at installing a civilian administration and breaking months of political deadlock. But the country's fragile economy has already been hard hit by months of mass protest.
Based on that, they cannot take any decision unless they wait for the new government to be formed and to make economic decisions for the coming times.
Long queues from cash machines through petrol stations to bakeries have become a common sight across the capital, Khartoum. Inflation, on the other hand, has dropped from a high of 70% in December, standing below 50% at the moment.
The currency prices rely on political stability, economic stability, and trading policies with foreign countries. All these factors need to be taken into consideration to find solutions. Therefore, what we need is political stability in Sudan to have economical stability which will benefit all Sudanese.
Like many other businessmen, Hashim and his fellow business owners fear that months of political turmoil could bring on a full-scale economic collapse. Dina Matengo, CGTN.
And in Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta is scheduled to commission the Lake Turkana wind power project on Friday. Now, the project is another step towards the realization of Kenya's plans to fully utilize green energy by 2022. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa reviews the project.
The commissioning of the Lake Turkana wind power project is a culmination of about a decade of work, from concept to actualization. Located in a remote corner of Kenya, the wind power project is Africa's largest wind farm and Kenya's largest private sector investment. A visit to the site shows why investors chose this location. Heavy winds drive the windmills, generating clean power. There are 365 turbines. Together, they have the capacity to generate 310 megawatts. And since 2017, the project has quickly gained ground, injecting the power into Kenya's national grid.
On the 22nd of January, we were at about 97% capacity factor at 302 megawatts at one particular instant. So from a production point of view, it has certainly exceeded our expectations.
The project has propelled wind energy above thermal power. Wind power is now the third highest power generator in the country after geothermal and hydro sources. The project has also opened up the area to the rest of the country, but it hasn't been all smooth sailing. A section of locals have moved to court arguing that the project implementers did not follow due process in acquisition of land. The case is yet to be determined. But on the ground, there's an air of excitement. A dream is unfolding.
And at one point, we even doubted if the wind would be enough to give us whatever we are seeing today. So seeing the turbines turning, seeing the grid containing all this, seeing the substation generating all this, and us being able to send this through the transmission line, that's the pride we have as engineers in this field.
Marsabit County has leased the land to the wind power project for a term of 33 years, with an option to extend up to 99 years. Investors hope to break even by 2024. Wilkis Anyabo, CGTN.
Well, let's go back to one of our top stories for the day. Zimbabwe's economy continues to struggle despite efforts by Finance Minister Neuralink to get it back to growth. Of course, he seems to be doing everything, but results are slow to come so far. Well, let's get more on the current state of the economy. We're joined by Farai Mwakutuya in Harare. Farai, welcome to the show. Now, it certainly seems like government reforms to revive the economy and suddenly set fiscal discipline are working so far. The country is running a budget, a surplus for the first time in years. Yet, Farai, we're seeing inflation has soared to its highest level in a decade. Are these reforms working?
Uche, I think there is evidence to show that they are indeed working. You've spoken about that budget surplus. We've also seen the government successfully implement fiscal reforms. It's cut off its credit line with the central bank. It's stopped unnecessary borrowing. It's stopped money creation. It's mopped up excess liquidity in the market. It's backed up its fiscal reforms with monetary policy reforms, particularly on the currency, which has stabilized the exchange rate. It's set up this interbank foreign exchange market, amongst others. So clearly on that front, it is being successful, and it's won the backing of the IMF amongst other stakeholders. So clearly there is progress on that front. Inflation that you talk about, I think the figures that have breached that 100% mark, 175%, date back to June, prior to some of the reforms on the currency front that are now in place. So we expect that going forward, we will start to see the results of some of these reforms from those inflation figures. The authorities here have been on record as saying that come final third of 2019, they expect the rate of inflation to start retreating on the back of some of these reforms. So again, you mentioned it in your introduction, it is about time. They require more time for the dividends and the results of these efforts to be felt, and hopefully we'll start to see them. But for now, I think so far so good. Things are on the right track, perhaps not moving as fast as people would like, but clearly steps towards the right direction.
Well, let's get an update on some of those specific plans. As you mentioned, one of the biggest reforms was in terms of the country's currency. In fact, the government did outlaw the use of foreign currencies in June. Is that plan panning out? Are we seeing the Zim dollar finally gaining traction in the country?
Well, Uche, I think we've moved from the outrage that had characterized its introduction. People are now, I think, starting to understand it a bit more, to accept what's happening a bit more. I think it will be a bit far-fetched to say that people have wholly accepted these reforms, but I think people are starting to find their way around the new currency regime and the new currency reforms. And if you look, for instance, at the interbank market, the rates on the interbank market as well as the parallel market, they are starting to converge converge before the introduction of this statutory instrument that banned the use of foreign currency. The black market rate, for instance, for foreign currency had risen to as much as 15 to 1. It is now down to about 10 to 1. The interbank rate is about between 8 and 9 to 1. So there is a convergence there. There is stability. Those rates have come down. I think there is better companies are now getting better access. The system is more efficient, although it could be better. There are still some bottlenecks. There is need for improvement. So yes, I think the market is starting to warm up to the reforms, but there is still a bit more work to be done in terms of completely winning over the people.
Now, President Mnangagwa, he's been working hard to re-engage with international partners and hopefully open that door to more investment in the country. We know he's made a couple of trips recently, including the US Africa Business Summit, which we saw last month in Mozambique. Have his efforts been fruitful so far?
Well, I think the president, ever since he came into power, has repeatedly said Zimbabwe is open for business. That's an invitation to anyone from anywhere to come and do business in Zimbabwe. We've seen a number of business delegations from all over the world come to Zimbabwe. Potential investors come here. And I think the frustration for many Zimbabweans is that those trips have not been converted to actual deals on the ground. There are a few that can be highlighted. Most recently, Alrosa, the diamond mining company. That deal was consummated and sealed last week. There are also platinum projects that are in the pipeline. They will take time. I think Zimbabweans are learning now to appreciate that these things don't happen overnight. There are a few things that need to be ironed out, details that need to be perfected and finalized. So it is a process of, it is a process. It will take time, and people are learning to appreciate that. I think you speak of the US Africa Summit. I think the United States is one partner that Zimbabwe has tried to reach out to, but I think whatever efforts it's making will be impeded because of the sanctions that remain on Zimbabwe. Investors from the US who would want to do business here will be put off. They'll be deterred by the fact that they could stand to be penalized if they do business with the wrong type of people here in Zimbabwe. And so a number of other key markets, key investors will take a cue from the position of the United States. It is something that the government has said it will continue to reach out to the United States and hopefully make a breakthrough. But I think at that point, at this stage, the sanctions remain the biggest impediment to this reintegration, to this economic turnaround. So a lot has been done in terms of inviting investors, trying to make the business environment conducive, make it easier for investors to set up and run their businesses. Progress not as swift or as quickly as people would like, but certainly the government has said it is pursuing it. It's not stopping. It will continue on that, on that path.
Right. Well, as always, many thanks for your insights, Farai. That was Farai Mwakutuya joining us there in Harare. And shifting focus now, let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. French car maker Renault plans to assemble 2 low-cost vehicles in Nigeria through a joint venture with local firm Coscharis. Now, Renault is a leader in Africa with about 18% market share. It is currently working to maintain its leadership within the continent by responding to the demand of the new emerging middle class of countries like Nigeria. An Italian prosecutor says Eni approached a witness to withdraw some statements he had made during investigations into a Nigerian corruption case involving the firm. Eni has been accused of buying a Nigerian oil field with the knowledge that most of the $1.3 billion purchase price would be siphoned off to agents and middlemen in corrupt payments. The oil major, however, has denied any wrongdoing in the trial. And Britain's EasyJet has recorded an 11.4% increase in its revenues for the quarter ending June 30th to stand at about $2.3 billion. The airline attributes the growth to more bookings, initiatives to optimize its pricing, as well as more ancillary revenue from additional services. Shares of EasyJet rose by around 3.2% on the announcement. And stocks are moving lower on Wall Street as a big miss in subscribers by streaming giant Netflix pulls down communication companies. Netflix plunged by 11% in early trade on Thursday. Now, this comes as investors worried over the lower than expected global growth and signs of trouble in the firm's US base. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we're heading into a short break now. Here's a look at what's still to come. South Africa's central bank cuts lending rates in order to boost growth. And the World Bank praises Egypt's economic reforms.
The economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Well, let's head to South Africa now, where the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee has decided to cut its benchmark repo rate by 25 basis points to 6.5%. Now, of course, this is the first time since March last year that the benchmark interest rate has been slashed. The latest move is aimed at stimulating more growth in the stagnating South African economy.
The SARB now expects growth for 2019 to average 0.6%. The forecast for 2020 and 2021 is unchanged at 1.8% and 2% respectively. The MPC assesses the risks to the growth forecast to be balanced in the near term, but remains concerned about longer-term risks. Investment prospects will continue to be limited in the absence of structural reforms. The escalation of trade tensions could have further negative impacts.
Well, let's get more on today's rate announcement from Sumitra Naidu. She joins us in Johannesburg. Great to have you on the show, Sumitra. Now, of course, today's decision, certainly good news for South African consumers, but we did see this year's GDP growth forecast slashed from 1% to 0.6%. So given the extremely weak economy, Sumitra, and a declining inflation rate, what sort of tone did you see come out of today's meeting?
So, Uche, I think the governor was quite stoic today. Again, very conservative as usual. And yes, that was quite concerning that the bank again lowered its forecast for growth this year. We're only 7 months into the year and the bank has lowered this forecast 3 times already. And the governor didn't hold back again, reiterating the need for government to urgently address structural reforms. He said in his statement today that a monetary policy is not the answer to reviving this economy. Policy changes are needed. So the rate cut will offer some relief, but very little. Demand remains extremely weak. It will only be really effective if it's done together with the structural reforms in this economy. Uche?
Quite right, as you mentioned, Sumitra, a lot of analysts saying the same things, that growth prospects lie with structural reforms and not monetary policy. So, of course, then is today's decision expected to help boost output in the country going forward?
Yes, so, this is not new. These calls for structural reforms are going on for years. Economists have been warning that the lack thereof will have dire consequences. The rating agencies, too, have been raising the alarm on this one. And we're seeing it in the numbers. The economy grew just 0.8% in 2018. The forecast for this year is now at 0.6% from the Reserve Bank, at least. Drastic changes, of course, are needed. The policy thus far hasn't actually worked. A lot of it hasn't been implemented. Promises of 5 million jobs have come and gone. Unemployment is now over 27%, and that's why we're seeing this constrained demand. People don't actually have any money to spend, and those that do have nothing really to spare because of rising costs. Uche.
Well, Sumitra, how much did politics play in today's decision? Did we see the RBS taking a more cautious approach or asserting its independence, of course, given the calls we've seen to expand its mandate?
So, Uche, most experts are mixed on this. Some of the view that there was a bit of political pressure coming through following calls for the mandate of the Reserve Bank to be expanded. And it's really ignited vigorous debate on the importance of the Reserve Bank and its role in the economy, that it's too conservative and that it should be cutting rates more aggressively. There's also the nationalization issue. If the bank took on a more developmental role in this economy and didn't only serve the interests of commercial banks, there would be cheaper money going towards government infrastructure projects, which in turn would lead to job creation and spur demand. The other view, though, is that the bank does remain totally independent in its decision making. And if you look at inflation, which has moderated, food inflation in particular, coming down to just over 5%, the rand strengthening since the last meeting, and the economy is extremely weak, there was definitely room for a rate cut, as was the case at the last meeting. Interestingly, I spoke to one economist today that said this could have also been a decision taken to make up for the rate hike that was made in November last year. At the time, inflation was also in check. The rand was stronger. Oil prices were at near record lows. So there was more of an argument then for a rate cut. But instead, the bank was too concerned, very cautious, worried about global tensions and the electricity crisis, that it actually chose to raise rates. But there is a consensus that, the bank remains independent. There is a monetary policy committee that makes these decisions on rates, and that they were independent in today's decision. Uche?
All right. Well, it's always great to hear from you, Sumitra. Of course, that was Sumitra Naidu joining us there in Johannesburg. Well, let's move on now to Egypt. The World Bank has praised the economic reforms being implemented by the government. Those comments paved the way for a new billion-dollar facility from the institution to the North African nation. Well, CGTN's Yasser Hakim looks at the details of that World Bank report.
The outlook from the World Bank towards Egypt reforms has been positive. Numbers show a stronger Egyptian pound, economic growth rates hitting 5.5%, up from 3% in 2016. And higher inflows of foreign currency from sectors like tourism and expats remittances. The World Bank says new legislation and regulations to be applied this year would build investor confidence. That's a sign of support, noting that foreign investments had dropped by 2% year on year.
The latest amendments to the investment law are excellent. The law has adopted a mechanism for investors to exit the market and has included new clauses for bankruptcy. This is important to attract businesses back into the country. Another thing is that the new law has eased money transfer, which was not allowed recently. These are changes that will surely rebuild investor confidence.
The World Bank also expects a rise in non-petroleum exports, which have seen a 3.1% slump in 2018-2019 fiscal year. The way Egypt had handled the energy subsidy cuts was commended by the financial institution, especially that inflation rates have dropped to 9.1% from 35% in 2016-2017, in spite of the subsidies. However, there are challenges ahead.
The World Bank cited several issues that still need to be addressed, such as high inflation rates. There are also other sectors that haven't been developed, mainly health and education. The bank also said that another challenge is to reduce budget deficit even further. These are some of the main challenges that lie ahead.
The report by the World Bank has also been followed by a positive report by the IMF, which has said that it is planning to release the last batch of the $12 billion loan to Egypt in July. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, Tanzania has launched a new online portal where the public can access details of all mining contracts. The move is an attempt by the government to increase transparency in the sector. Other reforms include lowering some taxes for small-scale miners. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more from Dar es Salaam.
Mining in Tanzania is becoming more open. The government wants to clear the mystery in the sector by allowing the public to check details of contracts in a new online portal. There's no firm launch date or exact details of how it will work, but it follows requirements around disclosure in the 2015 Tanzania Extractive Industries Transparency and Accountability Act. So what is Haki Rasilimali is an organization that works to ensure mineral resource extraction contributes to national development. It says this is a step in the right direction.
We have the contracts being disclosed, and that maybe could assist stakeholders in making sure that there's thorough scrutiny of the terms of agreement in the contracts, which could assist also them to hold the government accountable at different spaces.
The government has also reduced taxes for small-scale miners.
Whatever they receive from the revenue can now be invested back to increase their production and also now pay the much needed royalty from their production.
In February this year, President Magufuli ordered the Minerals Ministry to make sure the entire country benefits more from the sector.
President Magufuli's new reforms aim at increasing government control in the sector so as to create maximum profit for the state. One challenge, however, would be making sure that these policies can be successful in the long term.
Government projections indicate that by 2025, mining's contribution to the national economy would have increased to 10% from the current 5%. But campaigners say more work needs to be done.
Injecting capital investment, engaging in research, engaging in participation, talking to stakeholders.
Secrecy around mining contracts has led to suspicions among Tanzanians that they have been shortchanged by the industry. The government hopes to tackle that by forcing the detail above ground. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
And moving on now, the co-founder of the world's largest private charitable organization, Melinda Gates, is urging G7 finance ministers and central bank governors to empower millions of women in Africa. Now, Melinda joined G7 finance ministers meeting in France to endorse a paper from her Gates Foundation. The project is aimed at promoting inclusion of women in the digital finance sphere. It will require about $255 million in initial funding, as well as regulatory action across Africa. Now, the initiative is set to prevent the cultural and market barriers that are leading women to be excluded from major technological achievements. Now, Hollywood recently premiered Disney's update of The Lion King, and that was something to sing about for some of the attendees. The 2019 edition of the movie is a photorealistic computer-animated musical drama film, which is produced by Walt Disney. Now, it depicts, of course, animals living in the East African savannah, and of course, that has seen Kenya's position as one of the world's leading destinations go a notch higher following the premiere. The Kenya Tourism Board has supported the Walt Disney Film Crew towards a partnership that showcases Kenya as the inspiration of the movie, as well as supporting premieres both locally and internationally. Now, KTB says that the movie will raise the country's profile and amplify the brand equity, especially with their media campaigns to promote Kenya. Now, of course, you're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, still to come on the show. Facebook's proposed cryptocurrency, the Libra, far from winning support from regulators. And a trip down memory lane in Russia.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves. with a dedicated and diverse team of anchors. CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. At least 6 soldiers have been killed in a militant attack in Borno State, Nigeria. Authorities there are blaming the attack on fighters affiliated to the Islamic State in West Africa province. Now, according to military sources, militants opened fire on a patrol vehicle at a place called Jakana, 30 kilometers from Borno State's capital, Maiduguri. More militants later staged another raid on a military base a few kilometers from the scene of the first incident. And in Egypt, at least 2 people have been killed in a suicide bomb attack in the restive Sinai Peninsula. The bombers were targeting security forces in the city of Sheikh Zuwaid. Now, 1 member of the security forces was killed while 3 others were wounded. A civilian also died in the explosion. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack through its Amaq agency. An international charity, Médecins Sans Frontières, has joined the Democratic Republic of Congo government in welcoming the decision by the World Health Organization. WHO declared the Ebola outbreak in the Great Lakes region nation a public health emergency of international concern. MSF says there is need for a change in approach in combating the spread of the disease. And lastly, a new National Reconciliation Commission is to oversee all future talks between Somalia and Somaliland. The move comes amidst increased political tension between the 2 nations, with Somaliland insisting that it remains an independent country. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, on the international front, the EU is imposing a $272 million fine on the world's biggest chip maker, Qualcomm. The European regulator says the company blocked a rival from the market about a decade ago. This is the second penalty from the block in 18 months as it targets top US tech companies for breaching antitrust rules.
To make sure that Icera's business could not reach a size that could endanger the market position of Qualcomm, Qualcomm took what it describes in internal documents preventive actions. This meant offering very targeted price concessions to 2 strategically important customers, namely Huawei and ZTE.
Meanwhile, French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire says digital currencies like Facebook's Libra raise serious difficulties to ensure they are not used to launder money and that users, of course, are protected. Now, he was speaking at a closing news conference of the G7 finance ministers who are meeting in Chantilly, north of Paris.
A
project such as Libra raises serious difficulties, technical and political difficulties. Regarding technical difficulties, it's simply because there are rules in finance matters, rules that we imposed ourselves, as sovereign states, as central banks, and that need to be respected by each and everyone. Rules on fighting money laundering, rules on fighting the financing of terrorism, rules on personal data protection, banking data, financial data are of course very sensitive. Rules to protect savings. These rules need to be respected by all the financial projects, whatever they are. Today, this is not the case with the Libra project, which has not put forward any provision to respect those rules that apply to all sovereign currencies in the world.
Now, the head of Facebook's digital currency project, David Marcus, told the U.S. House of Financial Services Committee that Facebook will take the time to get the digital currency just right. Here's CGTN's Giles Gibson with the details.
Day 2 for Facebook's David Marcus as he pitches Libra to skeptical lawmakers in Washington.
What is a Libra?
Congressman, Libra is a digital currency, a reserve-backed digital currency.
Is that a security?
We don't believe it is, Congressman.
House Democrats are already working on draft legislation called the Keep Big Tech Out of Finance Act, which would do exactly what its title suggests. Republicans on the committee are taking a different tack, arguing for thoughtful government oversight that won't stifle innovation. Facebook says its digital currency will empower billions of so-called unbanked people. David Marcus has now finished his 2-day congressional marathon after a first grilling in the U.S. Senate on Tuesday.
Mr. Chairman, I wish we could trust Facebook. It's pretty clear there's almost nobody in this committee that does. Thank you.
Senators scolded the Facebook executive for the company's sketchy record on protecting users' privacy as it pushes into the payments market. The tech giant is making that move as governments around the world scramble to figure out how to regulate cryptocurrencies.
Regulators haven't really come to terms yet whether they really are willing to let cryptocurrencies exist as a form of money. There's a whole international set of understandings and frameworks that really have to be dealt with.
Facebook says it will launch its digital currency in 2020. That means it has until next year to build the platform and convince lawmakers here in Washington not to move against it. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
Now, if you're wondering what exactly Facebook's Libra is, well, our next story breaks down the new cryptocurrency and what the social media giant hopes you'll be able to do with it, even though it hasn't quite arrived just yet.
Facebook announced exactly 1 month ago that it would create a blockchain-based cryptocurrency called Libra to debut in 2020. Facebook said that Libra would be global currency available to anyone with internet access. The proposal extends a digital payment method to a population that lacks stable currencies or financial services. Unlike other cryptocurrencies, Libra will be supported by government-backed assets for stability. Its value may fluctuate on those assets, which include bank deposits and government securities and currencies from stable central banks. Consumers won't have to go through Facebook to hold Libra because it will be available to Messenger and WhatsApp users as well. Facebook will also launch a digital wallet called Calibra to hold and transfer the Libra currency to other organizations. Libra transfers, including cross-border transactions, will be much faster and cheaper than any other current options.
Well, let's shift focus now to Iran. Facing an economy crippled by U.S. sanctions, Iranians are now turning to digital currencies such as Bitcoin to make extra money. But the lack of regulation surrounding the digital asset is prompting an alarm from both sides. In Iran, some government officials worry that the energy-hungry process of mining Bitcoin will abuse its system of subsidized electricity. The United States, on the other hand, says the cryptocurrency could be used to bypass the Trump administration sanctions. Like other digital currencies, Bitcoin is an alternative to money printed by sovereign governments around the world. Now, unlike those bills, however, cryptocurrencies are not controlled by a central bank.
It is clear that this place has turned into heaven for miners to extract Bitcoin. The business of mining is not forbidden in law, but the government and the central bank have ordered the Customs Bureau to ban the import of mining machines until new regulations are introduced. Some of our top clerics have issued fatwas to say that Bitcoin is money without reserve. This is rejected by the Islamic jurisprudence and is forbidden by the Islamic law. Not all of them, but some have this opinion.
Well, let's head to Britain now. The country has reacted with fury after a leading Eurocrat threw accusations at former Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit negotiators. Brexit Minister Martin Callanan urged Frans Timmermans, the European Commission's first Vice President, to cut out the childish insults ahead of the crunch Brexit talks. It did emerge that Timmermans had compared UK's Brexit negotiators to bumbling British sitcom Dad's Army character Lance Corporal Jones. He claimed he was left shocked by their approach and lack of plans to deliver Britain's EU divorce. Martin Callanan has since then hit out at Timmermans.
I think Mr. Timmermans needs to stop with the childish insults, and if he wants, is such a big fan of Dad's Army, he will know the riposte from Captain Mannering to such comments. Stupid boy.
And moving on now, car lovers from across Russia gathered in Yekaterinburg to witness the cup stage of the Russian Automobile Federation. Classic, antique and even vintage cars took to the city's streets, including Porsche, a Rolls-Royce and Soviet-era classics. Let's get more on that.
A total of 57 retro cars produced between 1930 and 1988 joined the race. The oldest was a Ford Model A, which dates from the 1930s.
It's very important for us to preserve the history, because it's not just automobiles, but historical epochs or stages of the automotive industry, both in our country and globally.
The races were held in two categories: sports for professionals and tourist for beginners. The winner was determined by a complex rating system. The rules state that the entrant vehicles must be more than 30 years old, in good technical condition and be fully authentic. That means they must have all original spare parts, and that's where the challenge lies.
The older the car, the more difficult it is to have it fully authentic, because there are less spare parts. They're hard to get if they break. You have to order them at a plant, wait for a long time, look for something similar. And in the case of some very complicated things which are just not available, you have to order them and have them specially produced.
The route went through the main streets of Yekaterinburg and the nearby city of Verkhnaya Pishma. Participants were able to compete and sightsee at the same time, passing famous sites like the Church on the Blood. The RAF Cup is a series of competitions under the auspices of the Russian Automobile Federation. It has been conducted since 2016. This year, the stages take place in 5 locations, including Moscow, St. Petersburg, Kaluga, and Veliki Novgorod. Yekaterinburg hosted the cup stage of the rally for the very first time. Song Wei, CGTN.
Now, it certainly seems like frontier technology is moving to the next stage, leaving artificial intelligence far behind. Elon Musk's Neuralink is developing brain-machine interfaces to implant devices in paralyzed humans. Now, in this way, people can now control phones or computers as they will. Here's CGTN's Jim Spellman with more on this story.
Elon Musk has developed electric cars with Tesla and sent rockets to space and back with SpaceX. But now he's taking on what may be the real final frontier.
We can do a full brain-machine interface.
Combining man and machine with a new technology dubbed Neuralink, which would allow data to be transmitted between humans and computers. Here's how it works. An array of tiny threads, only a tenth as big as a human hair, embedded with thousands of electrodes, is inserted into the brain by a robotic device. The threads are connected to a chip that transmits back and forth to an external receiver.
The interface to the chip is wireless, so you have no wires poking out of your head. Very, very important. It's basically Bluetooths to your phone.
Musk says Neuralink may help the human brain cure diseases and even reverse paralysis. Eventually, it could be used to connect with external devices.
With a high bandwidth brain-machine interface, I think we can actually go along for the ride. And we can effectively have the option of merging with AI. I think this is extremely important.
Neuralink claims the devices have been successfully implanted in rats and at least one monkey, who is able to control a computer with its brain. The company hopes to implant the first Neuralink into a human patient by the end of the year. Analysts worry this technology could have unforeseen negative impacts.
We aren't aware yet that the technology has gone in reverse, meaning that you can use some sort of external force to implant thoughts or something else inside of the brain. There are, like with anything else, there are downsides. Think about a hacker getting into a brain interface. That's one. Think about government control of people's brains, controlling what they think. Things like that are obviously a concern.
From Star Wars to the Terminator, science fiction has long dreamt of merging humans with technology. But with rapidly evolving robots and artificial intelligence,
hello, everyone, I'm an English artificial intelligence anchor.
What was once fiction is quickly becoming fact.
As this technology evolves, the question may be, can we merge man and machine without losing some of our humanity? Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
And moving on now, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. We saw oil prices edging lower, unable to shake off that downbeat mood of the past 2 days. And that was in response to a sharp rise in U.S. stockpiles of products such as petrol. Now, meanwhile, gold prices pulled back from a 2-week high to trade lower today as some investors took advantage of the last session's gains in order to book profits. Well, let's head into a quick break now. Here's a look at what's coming up. Farmers in Madagascar go to great lengths to protect their vanilla crop.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, projections show that by 2021, there will be nearly 25 million online shoppers in South Africa. And it is expected that they'll be spending in the region of $190 per day each by 2023. Now, currently, those shoppers are spending about $95 per day each in the electronics and media sectors. Here's Angelo Coppola with a look at what's happening in the rest of Africa.
South African online shopping growth has increased annually at 20%, but the retail component of that is still only 1.4%.
In the rest of Africa, it's far lower than that. The only real hotspots are Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya. Kenya probably the most sophisticated in terms of platforms, and also the integration of M-Pesa for mobile payments has been a big boost in Kenya. Nigeria probably has the biggest online retail operation in terms of its potential, which is Jumia, and that has in fact been listed on one of the US stock exchanges.
The opportunities for growth in online retail shopping are confined to specific areas.
Cities like Lagos and Nairobi are definitely ready for online shopping. They have extensive online retail services available in those markets. And that is because the infrastructure is there, the communications is there, banks are there as well. Although online retail is supposed to be digital, it is very much facilitated by the existence of physical infrastructure like transport networks, the roads, delivery services, and banking services.
Looking at the South African online shopping market, data is fairly accurate. Similar information isn't available continentally, however.
At this stage, we can't really see the percentage of impact that online retail is making outside of South Africa. In South Africa, we have an exact number. Worldwide Works conducted research that showed that 1.4% of total retail in South Africa is conducted online. The total retail market in South Africa is just over 1 trillion rand, and online retail makes up about 14 billion rand of that.
The retail shopping environment is different in each of the continent's countries.
The difference between South Africa and other markets across Africa is that there's a very powerful mall culture of people going to shopping malls to do their shopping. And that is what's keeping online retail from making a bigger impact on this economy. In other African markets, however, you don't have that extensive mall culture or a mall infrastructure.
The growth of retail online shopping is patchy at the best of times on the continent and largely depends on sufficient infrastructure and access to payment options. And of course, the most important, disposable income. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And moving on now, in less than 5 years, we have seen the wholesale price of the vanilla bean soar by nearly 500%. That makes it the second most expensive spice on the planet and worth more per kilo than silver. Now, during the same period, around 100,000 impoverished farmers in Madagascar have ridden that wave, splashing cash on motorcycles, 52-inch TVs and solar power systems. Now, that sweet boom has brought sour costs in an epidemic of theft, mob justice, and a dramatic fall in the quality of the coveted spice. Here's Alexandria Majala with more.
Rocketing vanilla prices bought Madagascan farmer Berlin Rannery a hot pink sofa set, a motorbike, and a double-barreled shotgun to protect his crop. Thieves have stolen almost 20 kilograms out of his 200-kilogram harvest this year, part of a crime wave washing over the East African island nation of Madagascar. Competition for the highly priced beans has sparked violence between vigilante farmers and thieves and a precipitate drop in the quality of the crop.
They came in here crawling, and when they found bunches of vanilla beans like these, they tore them out of their seedlings. Then, when they saw that I was here, they ran to this side. They continued to take bunches of vanilla beans on their way. They took about 3 kilograms of vanilla, 18 bunches.
Farmers are now being forced to pick and ripe beans for fear of thieves. These beans have much lower levels of vanillin, the compound that gives the spice its aroma and acts as a natural preservative. About 2/3 of the world's vanilla is grown in northern Madagascar. Vanilla pods are so expensive partly because the flowers must be painstakingly pollinated by hand if they grow outside their native areas.
While we are in our fields, we may use our weapons, but as long as it's possible to preserve lives, we will not use our weapons against them. It's better to understand why they come and steal vanilla.
The vanillin in Madagascar beans on the open market has halved to between 1.2 and 1.3%. Global demand for vanilla is so insatiable that dwindling quality has had little effect on price, although big buyers now try to avoid buying on the open market. Rannery's harvest, when blanched and sun-dried, will produce 33 kilos of black vanilla, worth around $5,700 on the local market, more than 10 times the national average income. Endemic corruption in the country makes it hard to stop inferior beans from being sold.
During police operations, when green vanilla thieves are arrested, there have been cases where the gendarmes are tempted by some rich people who give them money. It is a form of bribery that can put them in jail.
Official estimates indicate that thieves pilfered 10% of last year's harvest, and this season the numbers are projected to be worse. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And in Uganda, the country's fishing industry looks like it is back in business, and that's thanks to an increase in fish stocks in Lake Victoria. Now, the rise of the amounts of fish in the lake comes after a government crackdown on illegal fishing activities across the country. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
A busy day at the Lake Bounty Fish Factory, a sign that things are moving in the right direction for Uganda's fish factory. This after the country's government stepped up security around lakes in 2017 in a bid to stop illegal fishing. It also introduced stringent measures to control fishing.
This intervention is giving good results. So they have also gone into operating the companies which were closed, the factories, the facilities which were closed, like one in Jinja, one in Entebbe, and again another in Jinja.
More factories are expected to resume business now that fish stocks have increased.
We are seeing about 12 factories coming back, meaning that the amount of fish that is needed to be processed has gone up.
It is estimated that the reopening of fish factories could add about 330,000 tons of fish onto the market. Uganda's fish export volume is now just above 20,000 tons, an increase of more than a third compared to 2017. But as the fish industry struggles to regain its former glory of being the country's top foreign exchange earner, processors are concerned about the continued supply of illegal fishing gear on the market. They now want authorities to monitor suppliers of fishing equipment.
The biggest thing is to look at the source of these gears, where are they coming from, and to stop it from the source.
Local authorities say they are going to crack down on suppliers of illegal fishing gear. It's hoped this combined effort will mean that Uganda will soon be able to raise more revenue from this natural resource. Hilara Isiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Now, before we go, here's a quick look at how Africa's currencies performed today. We saw Kenya's shilling holding steady against the dollar, with inflows from offshore investors buying government debt, offering support against excess liquidity in the local money markets. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand gaining a few cents after the Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee cut interest rates by about 25 basis points, although it has rallied in recent months due, of course, to a weaker dollar. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and of course the rest of the team, thanks for watching.